Hello everybody and welcome back to my book club. Today I am not going to be talking about Crazy Rich Asians, the trilogy, which is what I promised that this video was going to be about the last time I recorded, because I haven't finished it yet. I read the first two very quickly, and so I'm just taking a small break before I finish them. But in the meantime, what I'm going to be talking to you about today is the Percy Jackson series. And the reason that I'm talking about Percy Jackson is because I've read it a bunch of times, and it's a series that I really, really like, and I'm going to tell you why today. The first thing that I need to mention is who wrote the Percy Jackson series, and his name is Rick Riordan. Now, Rick Riordan has written way more books than just the Percy Jackson series, including, you've got the Kane Chronicles, which are about Egyptian mythology. You've got the Magnus Chase series, which is about Norse mythology, so think Loki and Thor and the Nordic countries. There's also the Trials of Apollo, which is, again, about Greek mythology, but specifically about the god Apollo. And then you've got Percy Jackson series, and the Heroes of Olympus series, which I'm going to explain what those are in just a second. But what Rick Riordan, in general, writes about is mythology. So if you don't know what mythology is, you would probably find yourself kind of falling through a rabbit hole trying to figure out what it exactly is. Mythology is stories and kind of ways of explaining things, especially relating to kind of like ancient people and their explanations of how the world came to be and kind of why things are the way they are. So mythology is actually really interwoven in our society and kind of our everyday lives. If you think about even the planets, they're named for Roman gods, like Neptune or Mars, Pluto. They're named for Roman gods, and I don't think that that's something people really think about. They just think like, oh, the planet is called Neptune, and that's it. But mythology is, if you've ever looked into it, very complicated. There's so many different types. There's so many different stories, sometimes that even contradict themselves. It's all very, very complicated. And so what I really admire about Rick Riordan and his writing and his books is that he makes mythology accessible for everybody. Especially with, I would say, his most popular series, which is the Percy Jackson series. So I'm going to start with the Percy Jackson series just because it's kind of, I would say, the most well-known. It's also the ones that I started with. So I didn't actually start reading Percy Jackson until I was in college. And the reason that I picked up the Percy Jackson series, or The Lightning Thief, was because I was on Tumblr. And when I was on Tumblr, I kept on seeing all these things about Percy Jackson, Percy Jackson. I was like, what is this? I don't even know what this is. And so I went to Barnes & Noble and I was like, I'm looking for the Percy Jackson series. And they're like, oh yeah, it's over in the children's section. And I was like, okay. So I went over, grabbed The Lightning Thief, and loved it. So I would say that The Lightning Thief, out of all of the books, is probably the most, children's book-like. But I also think that as you go through the series and then the spin-off series, which is the Heroes of Olympus that I'm going to talk about in just a second, the books definitely go from more of like a children's book into more of like a YA book or young adult book, or young adult series, I should say. So I'm just going to kind of talk about the basics of Percy Jackson because I feel like there's no way that I would be able to talk about all of it in just this short amount of time. So the basics here is Percy Jackson is a kid, and he is a half-blood, which means that, or he's a demigod, which means he is half human and half god. His parents are, his mom, Sally, she's a human. And his dad, he learns, is a Greek god. Literally a god that lives on Olympus. And so eventually, just kind of long story short, Percy ends up at a camp for demigods, Camp Half-Blood. And he meets some friends, and he learns about his ancestry, and he learns why he is the way he is. He realizes why he has all these problems in his life, and everything kind of starts to make sense. But at Camp Half-Blood, there's always kind of this, you're always ready for something bad to happen, I guess, because these characters, these people, these kids that are at Camp Half-Blood, which is kind of like half summer camp, half basic training, kind of, they're ready to fight on a moment's notice all the time. And so Percy learns how to, sword fight and shoot a bow and arrow and all this stuff. And so everybody at camp is always prepared to go and fight, to go on a mission, to, save the world if need be. And so as a first-year camper at Camp Half-Blood, Percy gets a mission, and he has to take a couple of his friends to go and kind of save the day, save the world. And so the Lightning Thief starts out pretty... If you've never heard of a hero's journey, I would suggest you Google that. And that's kind of exactly the kind of... I don't know what I'm trying to say. A hero's journey is very... it's like what Rick Riordan used to write this book. So it's like a series of events that all heroes go through, and Percy Jackson is the hero of this story, and he goes through like those specific events, and it ends up being this perfect kind of ending where the good guy wins and all that stuff. And I really think, honestly, if Rick Riordan would have stopped with The Lightning Thief, it would have been a great standalone book. But lucky for us, he wrote a whole lot more. And as the series goes on, obviously there's more problems and there's bigger problems, and Percy has to, adapt, and he has to grow, and he has to learn through this whole series, because as like any main character, as like any hero, he has his flaws, and he has to learn how to overcome them, but also like save the world at the same time. So the Lightning Thief starts off with Percy being a kid. I think, if I'm remembering correctly, he's like 11. I wonder how long. Oh, he's 12. 12 years old. So he starts off as 12, and by the end of the entire series, he is late into his teens. And so in this series, not only does Percy grow, but I feel like the story grows with him, which is natural. And the books really start with The Lightning Thief. It's way more of a kid's book, like I said before. And as Percy grows, the story gets more and more YA, or more young adult. So I'm going to run through the books really quickly, just so that you know how the series goes. So the first one is called The Lightning Thief. The second one is called Sea of Monsters, which they did make a movie out of these two books, which is why this cover is the way it is. And then they stopped because the movies weren't that good. The next one is called The Titan's Curse. That's the third book. Yeah, the third book. Then we've got The Battle of the Labyrinth, which is the fourth book. And finally, The Last Olympian is the fifth book. And if you look at my books, you can see they're well worn. They've been used a lot because I read them quite often. Something else I'll mention is that they're pretty quick reads too, because they are, especially towards the beginning, a little bit more children's based. But also, lucky for us, after I got done with The Last Olympian, I was like, okay, I'm in love with this world. I'm in love with these books. I'm in love with these characters. Give me more. And Rick Riordan has delivered. He wrote another spin-off series of the Percy Jackson books, and it's called The Heroes of Olympus. And so I initially bought them because I was like, you know what, these sound pretty similar to Percy Jackson. I am going to read them. I love the characters of Percy Jackson, but if I could fall in love with these characters too. But lucky for us, Percy is back. Not right away, but eventually Percy is back, and we get to continue on with Percy's adventures as he grows into a teenager. And so the first book of the second series is called The Lost Hero. And actually, these books incorporate new characters and with new skills and new problems, and everything, again, it just keeps growing and growing and getting bigger and bigger. So The Lost Hero is what starts that second series, followed by The Son of Neptune. Then we've got The Mark of Athena, which these book covers are so awesome too. And then we've got The House of Hades. And then the last book is called Blood of Olympus. Let's see that. And these books, not only do they get more YA, they get a little bit more complicated, they also get a lot bigger. So if you are reading like the first book, or even the second book is even skinnier compared to the last book, you can see there's a lot of story there. I'm a big fan of thick books because that means there's a lot more detail to the story. And I've read this quite a few times. And obviously it takes me a little bit longer to get through these bigger books, but it's all worth it. Especially if you loved the Percy Jackson series and you start reading the Heroes of Olympus series and you're like, where's Percy? When's he coming in? When is this all going to be solved? Like, in the end, it's so worth it. And these books they're worth it. These books are really good. It's not a complicated read. These books are for anybody, which I think is super cool. You could buy this for like a third grader. If you wanted to start with The Lightning Thief, I would say absolutely could like a third grader pick this up and start reading it. But I'm 27, and I would read this tonight if I wanted to. They're so good. I love them. And I would especially recommend picking up these books if you are interested in, history, mythology, sci-fi, adventure, any of that stuff. I feel like there's something for everybody in these books, and I wouldn't stop at The Lightning Thief. I wouldn't stop there. Even if you're like, it's fine, but like it's a little bit young for me, keep going. Because this whole series, it just gets better and better and better and better and better. And it's so worth it to get to the end. And everything kind of wraps up, and it's awesome knowing kind of how everything ends up. And so this is definitely a series that I go back to all the time. It's a series that I tend to read like every Christmas because I'm sitting on break and I can get through pretty much the entire series on Christmas break, which again is awesome. It's kind of like watching a movie. And it's something that I think everybody should look at maybe at least once, just because they're super good. And I don't know how to end this. I feel like I'm rambling, but let me know either if A, you like Percy Jackson and you've already read it, or B, you are going to pick it up, or C, that you picked it up after you watched this video and you either liked it or didn't. I'm not saying that you have to love it, I'm just saying that I do. Anyways, that's it. Have a great night.